Good morning, and thank you for joining us. This is Barbara Winters, Vice President of Marketing with HG Data. I'm here to introduce Mark Godley, our Chief Revenue Officer, who will be sharing our webinar, How to Turn Data into Sales. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Barbara, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I have made a career in the last decade of helping technology startups get into revenue. I'm somehow drawn to these very embryonic early stage companies that have great ideas, but not many clients. Right now I do work for HG Data, which is an organization that is at the forefront of helping evolve the sales and marketing arenas to be more science-oriented, and those that are moving into the predictive analytics and the ABM worlds are finding that the data set that HG Data has built can be of significant value, which leads to what we're going to talk about today. This is going to be very much a personal perspective on the hype that is around ABM and predictive analytics right now. I'm certainly going to share with you HG Data's perspective on it, give you some real-world examples that draw upon my past and what we've seen at HG Data. Certainly then lead into a short and brief shameless plug of HG Data at the end of the discussion, and then lead into our Q&A. Hopefully we'll have a vibrant discussion of what topics are of interest to all of you listening today. As I said a minute ago, sales and marketing is really going through a transition from art to science. Data-driven is all the new rage. You go Google that right now, and you'll find tens of millions of hits about data-driven marketing and data-driven sales, and all different focuses on how data should be the underpinnings of how you approach the market. What's interesting from my perspective is we're really going from an environment of scarcity of information to one of abundance. And to some degree, having this blizzard of information is actually a scarier world. 20 years ago, when you didn't know who to call, who to talk to, how to figure out your addressable market, it was kind of easy because you could only find you had a paucity of leads, and so you would obviously go reach out to them. But now with all these tools that are and all this data that's allowing you to slice and dice and analyze your market in a plethora of different ways, it's actually more it's almost a bit numbing or paralyzing, because you can actually look at the market in so many different fashions. So not only do you need to listen to the data, as this quote talks about, but you need to figure out what subset of the data is important for you to pay attention to, so that in the blizzard of information, finding the nuggets of value is what all of us in the sales and marketing arenas now aspire to do. Surely in the last year, you've heard the term ABM, and for those few on the phone that maybe haven't heard it, that stands for account-based marketing. It's all the rage, and I think generally that's a good thing. What isn't a good thing is just about every MarTech and sales tech vendor that's been around for years in the last year has changed their website to say, we're the key to your ABM strategy. So what's happened is, a concept that is taking hold right now is being confused or cluttered by everyone latching onto it by saying, we're your ABM solution. So to define ABM a little bit from my perspective, and there are other vendors that can give you a much more comprehensive definition of ABM, I'll just define it very simply, which is ABM is about targeting accounts with precision. It's about a rifle approach to how you define your market rather than a shotgun approach. But there's a key concept here. It's about precision at scale. And a key thing I want you to walk away from this discussion having internalized is years ago, having precision and scale was not possible. They were oxymoronic. You could have one or the other. You could either target effectively and have an addressable market of 5, or you could go after hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of prospects, but you had no ability to target them effectively. What we can now do, because of the addition of data into the mix, is you can actually have both precision and scale. My personal opinion is ABM is also the pendulum swinging back from the belief that many of us fell victim to in the last decade, that all you have to do is buy a email tool such as marketing automation. You can start sending out tens of thousands of emails, create these very elaborate nurture campaigns, and all of a sudden your phone's going to start ringing and POs are going to start showing up at your door. Many of us are now a bit hungover from that never having been in fact true. And this old tactic of being very prescriptive, actually, a term that I've used in some of the evangelical work that I've done about whale hunting. This is really about before you reach out to a company or decide a company is part of your addressable market, doing a fair amount of analysis to know that there is a business need at that entity that your product or service addresses. Here's the predicament that all of us are in. If you want to be data-driven, if you want to institute ABM strategies, if you want to be effective with predictive analytics, all of that is predicated on your systems of record being both accurate and complete. Now, just like I said a minute ago, that precision and scale were oftentimes the antithesis of each other. Those two words I just used a second ago historically have been at opposition to one another. I use the words accurate and complete. Anybody listening to this webinar that can tell me they work for a company whose CRM is both complete and accurate, I want you to contact me after this webinar because I'd like to see it. I've never seen it. I don't see it today. It's something that I think all of us are trying to figure out as we move forward into this data-rich ABM world. But I will say that strive towards the goal of accuracy and completeness is the first step you have to take to be effective in being data-driven, in being predictive, in pursuing ABM strategies. Now, here's some good news. Third-party vendors, whether they be predictive analytics companies or ABM workflow solutions or, shameless plug, third-party data companies, are absolutely a major component that you should consider embracing to help get you closer to that nirvana of an accurate and complete system of record. Again, a quick clarification, HG Data is not a predictive analytics vendor. We are not an ABM vendor. We do fuel a lot of those vendors themselves. We are a major component that those vendors have brought to market to ensure that they can augment your database with the best, most accurate, most comprehensive, most actionable data. And we do have a vibrant set of direct customers that have sophistication in munging third-party data sets with first-party data and making it actionable. So I've hit some of these points in that prior slide, but the days of first-party data, and by first-party data, what I mean by that is information that you can glean from your clients, information that exists currently in your data set. It's existing data set in your systems of record. It's information that your prospects are filling out in form fill. It's information you can glean from website visits, from known visitors, etc. The days of that information being enough, kind of like your mom loves you. We all know your mom loves you, but at some point in our life, we have to get beyond that. So all of us in our corporate evolution have to get beyond us loving our own products. And one of the ways to do that is to augment your first-party data with third-party data. And eventually, it's not just about the data. It's about having a consistent data append, data hygiene, data cleanse, and analytics layer on top of whatever systems you're using, whether they be on the marketing automation side of the world or the sales side of the world. And let me give you two real-world examples that I think will, if any of you are feeling intimidated by what I've described, or feeling like this is just too difficult a road, or my CRM looks like that image I just showed a couple slides back. The good news is you're not the exception, you're the rule, and all of us are going on this journey together. So the first example I want to give you is a Fortune 100 tech company. It is a company all of you will absolutely recognize. I would guess that all of you are using this company's systems on a daily basis, but because I don't have the rights to disclose the logo and I would not want to embarrass the particular company, I'm not going to tell you who it is. I think you just need to trust me that this is real data and this is a real scenario. Matter of fact, this is a scenario from September of 2016. So this is not the distant past. This is current. And this is a company that makes some of the most sophisticated technologies in the world. Again, my guess is by the time you end today, you have used some of that company's some of their software or hardware. Now, like the cobbler's children not having shoes, their internal systems that define their go-to-market strategy are less than world-class. Matter of fact, when we started, by we I mean HG Data, started an engagement with this entity, they were very, very proud that their systems of record, which comprised both their marketing automation platform and their CRM, comprised and synced back and forth information on over 1 million distinct companies. Now, here's the problem with that. The problem with that is if you talked to the people who were responsible for market analytics at this entity, which was a distinct business unit that had as an internal customer both the marketing and sales group, they would tell you that the verified targeted accounts within that 1.04 million companies was only 32,000. Okay, so they had this enormous system, but I can't do math in my head very much anymore now that I'm in my late 40s. Whatever that percentage is, only 32,000 of a million were what they would consider a viable prospect. Now here's the crazy part about this. I hope you're sitting down right now. We asked them, what was your criteria for coming up with that 32,000? And they gave us a laundry list of, oh, it has to have this much revenue and be in this industry. And they gave us a whole bunch of other stuff. And we actually use that criteria to help them appreciate that there actually were 40,000 other companies not in their original 1.04 million targets, not encapsulated in the 32,000 subset of that 1.04 million, that were net new opportunities to them. And we showed them those 40,000 companies, and everyone across the organization, the analytics team, the marketing team, the sales team said, son of a gun, you're right. We had a blind spot of 40,000 companies we didn't know about because we weren't incorporating third-party data in an effective fashion. And by the way, again, this is the exception. This is the rule, not the exception. Whenever we do this kind of analysis with the biggest and brightest and most sophisticated marketing organizations on the planet, they are consistently blind to, I am comfortable on this call that will eventually be recorded, saying that 30% of their addressable market, they are consistently blind to. In this case, I think the math is 4 of 7. It's easily over 50%, probably over 60% of their market they were blind to. That is consistently the case. So don't be feeling intimidated, embarrassed, bad about if any of what I'm telling you today hits close to home. It is the norm for all of us. Matter of fact, speaking of us, let me give you an exact example from my past. Now, this example is 4 years old because I've been at HG Data 3 years, but at a prior company, I was brought in a really neat role. It was almost a consulting role where I reported to the CEO, but I had authority across the product team, the sales team, and the marketing team. My charter at this company, it was a venture-backed entity. I was brought in by the venture capital folks to accelerate the growth of the company. And so I kind of had this neat role of being able to kind of be a free agent and move fluidly between these departments. I met with the marketing team, and the marketing team was incredibly proud, just like that prior example, of the size of their database. But what we found was that the size of that database was actually a hindrance to the demand gen and the sales organizations. They were being overwhelmed on a daily basis by a blizzard of bad information coming out of that marketing group. That bad information was people that no longer worked at those companies, bad phone numbers, bad emails, stale information. And so by the time we were done with reviewing the impact this had, what finally got the attention of the organization is we believe that 70% of the activities initiated by sales or demand gen was being impacted negatively, was being held back, were dead ends because they were starting with bad information. 70% of their activities was impacted by bad information. It could be as simple as generating a calling list of 100 people that they wanted to talk to, only to find out that 30% of them were contacts that were no longer at the company, or bad phone numbers, et cetera. You get the idea of what I'm getting at here. So one of the first things we did was we went into an analysis of the underlying data set that the company was working off of. And we literally deleted 90% of the CRM. I'm not kidding you. I actually was the person that hit the delete key and deleted. By the way, full disclosure, we did export it to a Excel file. We did have a backup of it, okay? But reps went home on a Friday, and their database was X large. They came in on Monday, the database was 90% small. And you can imagine the reaction I got from the sales leadership who was responsible for quota, saying, Godly, what are you doing here? You're going to absolutely destroy us as a business. Well, and by the way, this was a job-making bet I was making at this company, where if this ended up failing, I would probably be working somewhere else. If this was successful, the company would get on a path of significant growth. You can see, basically what happened on this chart. The net of it is we had a 5x increase in 90 days in pipeline, in SQL conversion, in pipeline creation. It eventually resulted in much better close ratios. So a 9x reduction in the addressable market resulted in a 5x increase in pipeline creation. So I beat the horse dead. I think you hopefully are starting to get the theme of what is important to me personally, and what HG Data certainly fills some of the need of, which is quality data is an accelerant to your predictive analytics and your ABM strategies. Now, two side notes that before we move to Q&A that I do want to mention here, that are a derivative of if you pursue a strategy similar to what I've suggested here. The first thing is your sales funnel will change, the shape of your sales funnel will change significantly if you start taking a more qualitative ABM analytics approach to your marketing and sales efforts. The one on the left is typically what you see in most organizations, which you have this very wide and deep funnel. What that basically means is the sales team has a false sense of security, because what they're doing is they're not qualifying out early in the process, and they're carrying forward to the late stages of an engagement a bunch of deals that they know darn well are never going to close. So every organization I've gone to, I have aspired to a sales funnel such as the one on the right, which is shorter, which means less time, okay? So you're getting to yeses and nos much more quickly. And secondly, it's much more narrow. So what you're seeing here is at the first stage of the sales cycle, we are qualifying out very aggressively. We're qualifying out by doing analytics on SQLs. And we are having a team independent of the sales rep qualify accounts out. What happens here is the reps are scared to death because in the funnel on the left, they may eventually close only 20% of their late stage deals. In the funnel on the right, they need to close 60, 70% of their late stage deals. But here's the beautiful part about this. Because you're qualifying out early, 90% of the rep's time is spent with a smaller corpus, a smaller cohort of accounts. But because they're more highly qualified, that's time well spent. You're actually going to close larger deals, quicker deals, because you're getting rid of that false sense of security by carrying garbage very deep into your sales cycle. Other point, and this is really a prerequisite for embarking on any of these strategies. If you're listening to this on a marketing organization or sales organization, and you don't have engineering quality staff that report to you, you need to reconsider that. Technical resources in the marketing and sales organization, I believe, are the next wave of growth for us to be successful embarking on these very data-driven, science-oriented analytics strategies to be effective. So we all need quasi-engineer, coder-level folks that are probably designing your product in the back room, but they also need to understand markets. They need to understand the competitive landscape. They need to understand the buyer's journey. They need to understand the competitive landscape. So you're really looking for this very high-powered, I used to call these folks 2 or 3 years ago purple squirrels because they don't exist, but they're starting to emerge. And I would argue that having a great sales operations person, when I say sales ops, that doesn't necessarily mean they report into sales. Many of them are marketing ops people. But I would argue that you could probably increase the effectiveness of your go-to-market strategy by 20% overnight by hiring a world-class sales ops, marketing ops person. And I think this is going to be one of the biggest levers as you think about the next 2 to 3 to 5 years of work you have to do at the company you're at today, or one that you will be at the future. I believe companies that are embracing sales operations as a key strategic lever, not a tactical, just make sure the lead gets routed properly, but someone that understands APIs, integrations, systems, moving data between systems, analyzing close lost, not just close won. That type of person, and then building systems that allow that to allow you to be incredibly data driven. Companies that embrace this are going to be the leaders of their field. They are the next set of unicorns as we move out into the next decade or so of the work we do. Okay, now afford me 3 minutes, and I'm going to keep this to 3 minutes of the shameless plug for HG Data. I've tried to relay some information which is very non-parochial, but given that we do believe HG Data does play a very big role, or can play a very big role for tech companies, let me just go through very briefly what the heck HG Data does. HG Data has reverse engineered the softwares and hardwares in use by companies across the globe. There's a bunch of stats on this page. You can read them without me going through it item by item. But the basic point of the data set we've built is, we believe if you understand the information about a company before you target them, before you do any outreach to them, you can be more effective. So understanding the products they have in place, understanding the attributes that define that company effectively. We believe we're building the firmographics of the future. Stuff that you might be relying on today, number of employees, postal, revenue, we think those are going to go the way of the buggy whip, and that we are going to be able to build a map of what's of interest to a company that is much more rich, much more vibrant than the traditional elements you might be using today. How have we done this? This is actually, we actually do have rocket scientists that work for us. This actually is very impressive. We don't do this by having fingers on keyboards and brute force offshore labor. We've built these vibrant data sets through a very sophisticated data science, machine learning method. I could drop a whole bunch of jargon, but it doesn't really matter. What we have done is we are actually listening to information that's put out in the public record. We've aggregated that information, the exhaust of press releases and news articles and job postings and resumes and a whole bunch of other stuff. We've collected that in a proprietary corpus, and then we are running algorithms against it that is contextually aware, that helps us make the connections between a company using Salesforce, a company having a international shipping department, and a whole bunch of other a company implementing a 401k plan. We're able to separate the signals from the noise by building a corpus of billions of documents and having the algorithms that can understand the contextual awareness of the text within that documentation. Ultimately, our data is used across all the departments that are market facing. So it's used by marketing organizations, it's used by analytics teams, it's used by sales teams, it's used by customer success teams to do all kinds of sophisticated analysis on addressable market, on messaging, on upsell, cross-sell, in their ABM and predictive analytics strategies. That's enough of the shameless plug. Let's move on to Q&A here and see if any of this dialogue has resulted in some questions or comments from those of you who have been listening.
Okay. All right, thank you for joining. We now have a few minutes to take questions from the audience. I'm going to go and check and see what questions have come in, and we'll start there. If you do have questions, please enter them now. And let's get started with that, Mark, if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's see. How do you define, you mentioned earlier in the presentation, this came in on the web, one of the questions. How do you define first-party data, Mark?
Well, I don't have a very complex definition of first-party data. I mean, when I'm referring to it, what I'm talking about is information that's collected directly by us as an organization, whether it be sales reps keying in information into the CRM themselves based on accounts they're interacting with, whether it's trade show data that we've collected by scanning badges and are bringing into our system of record, whether it's sales data we have from our client base, whether it's information on web visitation that we're pulling off our website. All that information is information that we procured through our own personal efforts. And eventually, I guess the point is third-party data becomes first-party data, after you've incorporated it and find value in it. But the distinction between first-party data and third-party data is internally generated versus purchased by a third party that has created it for various purposes.
Okay, thank you. We have another question about what you called the purple unicorn, the sales ops description. Could you share sort of a summary of what that job description looks like?
Yeah, purple squirrel is the term I use, that I've used for years. But there really is a fascinating constellation of skills that I'm seeing come up in the generation one decade below myself, which is they have this really interesting set of market-facing sales engineering skills where they can talk to prospects, they ask very good questions, they listen very well, they understand go-to-market strategy, but son of a gun, they can code too. And so, going back to when I was starting my career, there was a very clear line between engineers were engineers. They tended to be back office folks that, were, never saw the light of day. And then you had these swashbuckling sales folks that could talk a good game, but, needed help getting their email or getting their VCR programmed, to use a personal example. Today, we're seeing much more technical folks that either aspire to be front office or vice versa. And what that's what's happening is that sales and marketing is in general going from art to science. These people are becoming much more critical to the strategic execution, if not design, of a sales and marketing effort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I'll take one more here that came in online, and then we'll see if there's any live questions. We had a couple of questions actually about the process overall feeling very intimidating, this idea of really analyzing your funnel, and you mentioned cutting it by 90%. That's very intimidating. But just as any company wants to look at this process, where do you think they should start?
Where should they start? Well, I guess like any 13-step program, admitting you have a problem is a good one. And I think most companies, when I say have a problem, I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek. I mean, most companies are not yet strategically defining markets. The typical response to trying to drive more revenue is, well, let's just work harder. Let's put more cheeks in seats, in one sense or the other, as opposed to being very thoughtful and prescriptive in how do you define your market? How do you communicate with that precision at scale that I talk about? Now the good news is, if I go back 10 years ago, the companies that were doing this were really only the billion-dollar-plus entities that had the ability to have offshore teams or build custom code. But there really has been a massive democratization of analytics tools, and a massive explosion of companies trying to fill the need here. So what I would do, one of the first things I would do is I would get cross-departmental support. If I go back to the example I gave earlier of me being in this kind of almost linebacker role where I span marketing, sales, and product, if any of you are listening in one of those three departments, and maybe there's a fourth or fifth, analytics or something, getting support across the entire team that develops the go-to-market strategy, I think is important before you embark on one of these projects. Secondly, define success. What does success mean? Likely it's going to be very qualitative at first, but eventually should evolve into a quantitative measurement. Folks might have heard the term revenue-based marketing, where in the past marketing was responsible for creating MQLs, and then once an MQL was created, the finger pointing would start. Marketing would blame sales. You can't sell my leads. Sales would say the leads stink, and you'd never get very far except this stalemate. Well, now marketing is becoming much more accountable to actually bookings results. And so I think it's important to define success of a project like this. And then, there's lots of ecosystems out there that you can tap into. Talk to your peer group about what systems they've used and what solutions they've embarked on, whether they be analytic solutions or predictive solutions or data analysis solutions or data append solutions. A quick Google search will probably turn up more vendors than you would ever want to investigate. And one last tip before I shut up and get off my soapbox here is whatever vendors you talk to, probably the most important questions I would ask is, can you refer me to 5 of your clients and tell me the use case or the success story? And the reason I say that is not only has the democratization happened in any size company, even startups, 5, 10, 15, $20 million embryonic companies, not only have the barriers to entry in working with vendors in the predictive ABM space been brought down, but also the barriers that have been brought down to hang out a shingle, build a beautiful website and claim you're an ABM or predictive vendor. And I think, kind of holding their feet to the fire to make sure they're a viable entity with a real product and a successful track record of delivering is a degree of scrutiny I would encourage anyone to hold a prospective vendor partner up against.
Okay, thanks, Mark. We have one last question here, which is sort of the flip side of the one you just answered, and then we'll close. What mistakes have you seen in this market that might provide good?
Well, I think some of the things I just mentioned are based upon scars on my back from having made some mistakes of not seeking consensus, not defining success. I think the other, let me add one more, which is don't try to do too much too quickly. With this brave new world of analytics and this tsunami of data, it can get very intoxicating to build an amazing system that qualifies leads, predicts your next customer, and almost like the mistakes of marketing automation, where we thought if we just spam the world, and notice I'm saying we here, POs would show up at our door. I think it's important for us not to overhype what a ABM predictive analytics strategy will do for you. Nothing gets in the way of hard work. Nothing gets in the way of good product. So I just think be cautious in your ambition. Set reasonable goals that are incremental from where you are today. If you were like most of the companies I've worked for in that F100 company I mentioned earlier, I would say, eat the elephant one bite at a time, and don't claim that you are going to revolutionize the organization in a quarter or two, or else you may find yourself looking for a job by being overly ambitious or enthusiastic about expectations.
Okay, looks like we've answered the questions from the audience. So for those of you who are still on the line, we just want to thank you for participating, and feel free to contact us through the network if you have any further questions. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Barbara.